Alright, well in this video we're ready to dig into the meat of the bookkeeping process, which is the ongoing categorization of transactions. And that's really all bookkeeping is we want to take all the transactions that happen in your checking account and in your credit cards. What we're going to do is we're going to create a corresponding transaction in the accounting system so that matches real life. So kind of the methodology or the workflow in Xero is the feeds are set up. What it does is it imports transactions from the bank account, and it's going to do it for every single account. So if you have 3 accounts, you're probably going to see reconciled 29 items for the checking account, reconciled 12 items for the savings account, and reconciled 30 transactions for the credit card. And so what we're going to end up doing during this bookkeeping process is we're going to go account by account, and we're going to go reconcile or categorize the items that have been imported. And so just walking you through real quick the big picture of the interface here is we have the account title, where we're at. You can switch from account to account. You have the account balances up here. And then what we're going to have are 4 tabs. So there's 2 screens to categorize or reconcile transactions in Xero. This is the reconcile screen workflow. There's also a cache coding workflow. I'm going to go into a lot more detail about cache coding in a later video. We're mostly going to focus on this one tab right here. But there's also a bank statement. So if you need to go look up any transactions that have been imported for this particular account, you'd find that in the bank statements tab. Then there's account transactions. This corresponds to all the transactions that we have created in Xero to match the bank statements. So if you ever need to go change, edit, look up, remove any transactions that you've created in Xero, this is the tab that you're going to want to go ahead and process that in. But let's focus on this reconcile screen. So this is the standard screen that Xero uses to categorize and code transactions. So on the left hand side we see what I call the bank data. So you have the date the transaction occurred, you have a reference that usually contains like a vendor, has a lot of reference digits, it sometimes includes a location and maybe even a phone number. So you use this reference data to give you clues on what the transaction is about. And then what you have are amounts. So there's 2 different columns in this reconcile screen. There's the spent column and the received column. So this is telling you, okay, is money coming into this account or is money going out of this account? In the case of this transaction, we have $100 that is coming into the checking account from City Limousine. So we're actually using the demo company. So in this case, maybe this is a vendor of theirs, and maybe they sold something to City Limousines for $100. In the case of this check, ended up spending $1,100. So the spent and received columns are very, very important for understanding the context of the transaction. So by default, this screen will lay out 10 transactions that have been imported from the bank account. If you want to go to the next 10 transactions, you'll have to hit these buttons at the bottom, next, or go to the last page. You can also just jump to a particular page, maybe the middle pages. There's also a little feature down here, suggest previous entries. So let's say you see Central City parking a lot. Over time, Xero's going to kind of pick up on how you handle Central City parking. It's going to suggest to you, do you want to handle this the same way you've handled it in the past? So if that gets annoying or it's not very useful, you can turn that off, but I found it's usually pretty useful. So on the left-hand side, we have all of our bank statement lines. And then what we're going to do on the right-hand side is we're going to go ahead and process those in Xero. So you can process those in a few different ways. In this case, we're receiving money. So, a situation that's going to happen for you is you're going to receive money from Amazon. So generally what you're going to do is you're going to go to the match button and you're going to go search for the corresponding invoice that came in from A2X. I have a whole video that goes into a lot more detail about how to match up your Amazon payouts in the reconcile screen. Let's say, moving on to this next transaction, we have a check for $12.36. Well, probably what happened in this case, there was a supplier, and in this demo company, somebody came in and recorded a payment against that supplier bill. for 1181.25. So what happens is whenever you create a partial payment on a bill, let's say for example you put 30% down on a shipment, you can go in, create a bill for the entire shipment, and then when you pay a partial payment, you go into that bill and say, hey, I only paid 30% down, and you'll apply a payment to that bill. And then when you come to the reconcile screen, what's really cool is it'll automatically match this up for you. So all you have to do is go ahead and click OK. And that cash that your bank said you spent in the form of a check, in the accounting system, what it's doing in the background is it's saying, hey, that cash went out of the checking account, but it went to pay off that supplier bill. So this may seem really simple, but there's a lot going on in the background. So some other things that may happen, let's say this Swanson security, let's say maybe this is the software. So in the case of software, you may have a one-time software fee, in which case we'll come to this create tab and we'll just plug in the name. So we'll call this Swanson security. And then zero, you hit tab, and zero is going to ask you, well, what is this transaction for? What account do you want to categorize this transaction as? So you could either hit this drop down menu and go looking for it. You can also go ahead and type it in. Let's call this an office expense. You can keyword search office expense and it will show up. So you'll notice once I type in Swanson security and office expenses, the OK button will magically appear. These two fields are the minimum amount of data that Xero needs to create a transaction. You can optionally add a description like, I don't know, antivirus software. So this is optional. It's for your own internal purpose. If most of the time I actually don't end up using descriptions because it's usually the vendor and the account, it's usually self-explanatory enough. But you can also, what you do when you create a transaction, you can add a secondary tag called a tracking category. You can go check that out in settings. You can change the tax setting. I usually don't. I keep it at 0%. And then you can also, if let's say you want to add details, like maybe this particular line item, you want to code part of it to one account and part of it to another, you can use this add details feature to add multiple line items. For example, maybe we want to put $30 to a consulting expense, and then the other $29.55 we want to put the office expenses. We can add these details and break up line item by line item if that happens. Usually it doesn't happen too often, but just be aware of that add details feature. So let's say, this all looks good. We're going to hit OK, and essentially you're going to follow this process one by one, and maybe, for example, let's check out this transaction right here, e-bank deposit. Let's pretend for a minute that this was a transfer from your savings account to your checking account. If that's the case, then what you're going to want to do is go to this transfer tab, and you're going to want to select the account that this money, remember this is on the right hand side, so this is received money. So this $1,000 was received from where? We're going to go ahead and click savings account. You're going to encounter this a lot if you use credit cards and you pay off your credit cards. If you're in your checking account, you'll see spent money, $1,000. In that case, you'll hit transfer, select bank account, and you'll say credit card because the money is spent and going to the credit card. So this transfer tab is pretty much anytime you're transferring funds from one account in Xero to another, for example, checking to a credit card or a savings to a checking account, etc. And in terms of reference, it's usually going to steal the reference from this side if there's anything in the reference column. If not, you can leave it blank, no big deal. With that said, the last function that you're going to see on this reconcile screen is this discuss tab. So maybe we'll go back to this first transaction. In this case, maybe you have a partner or there's someone else you collaborate with on the accounting. Then one really useful feature is you can go ahead and throw in a note here and say, hey partner, is this payment on a really old invoice? I'm not sure where to code it. You come in here and hit save, so whenever your partner or your other collaborator comes in, they can see these discussion notes and they can come down and write a note back to you or just process the transaction themselves. So This is the primary way that you would categorize transactions, and you just go one by one by one. The last thing I'll say before I sign off on this video is, let's say this Cooper Street Bakery, you go to Cooper Street Bakery all the time. Over time, it's going to get annoying typing in the same thing over and over and over again. In that case, you're going to want to go ahead and create a rule for it, because this is something you're going to see over and over again. You want Xero to just like automatically process it, just like this 7-Eleven. You can create a bank rule so that every time Xero sees 7-Eleven, it just automatically codes everything for you, and then you can just hit OK. So in a later video, I discuss how to create roles. Super powerful feature. You want to check that out. But by far, this is the main process that you're going to be using in the bookkeeping process. And you're going to want to check out the cash coding video, because that's going to take this whole categorization process and put it into warp speed. So we'll see you in the next video.